In this video, I'll show you how to make my small drawstring bag using a pre-loved garment. This pattern includes 3 sizes and is a great way to turn unwanted clothing into a practical everyday bag. If you'd like to make your own, you'll find the pattern linked in the description. This bag features a fully lined interior with a drawstring closure and a removable shoulder strap, making it ideal for giving old garments a second life. For the outer fabric, you'll need a pre-loved non-stretch garment. Jackets, coats and trousers tend to work particularly well. I'm using some leftover faux leather trouser fabric from a previous project. You'll also need a lining fabric. This can be any lightweight fabric you have. I am using a lining from an old suit jacket which I have left over from another previous project. Cut out all pattern pieces from your chosen fabrics. I decided to incorporate the existing seam on these trousers into my bag. I'm marking the trouser seam onto the pattern so I can position it deliberately on the finished bag. You can do the same with existing seams, pockets, or design features if you'd like to incorporate them into your own version. Ensure the fabric is as flat as possible when positioning. You may need to unpick seams or iron your fabric accordingly. If you are using faux or real leather, and to avoid creating pinholes in these types of fabrics, you may need to use paperweights to weigh down the pattern whilst you draw around it. Alternatively, you could skip the drawing step and just cut out using a roller cutter and a raised metal ruler. Mark all drill holes and notches as you cut. It's worth testing your chalk on a scrap piece first to make sure the marks can be removed afterwards. I cut the front, back, drawstring facing and internal loops out of the faux leather fabric. Cut your bag lining out of your chosen fabric, in my case an old jacket lining. First I had to iron the fabric, then pin, cut and notch. With all of the pieces cut, it's time to start sewing. First, sew the top of one lining piece to the top of one outer front or back piece, placing right sides together. Align notches and use fabric clips to hold in place if needed. Sew 1 cm seam allowance, reverse stitching at beginning and end. Repeat for the other side. Lightly iron the seam flat, protecting fabrics with an untextured cotton tea towel. Sew the internal loops by folding right sides together, using the notches as a guide. Sew 1 cm seam allowance, reverse stitching at beginning and end. Repeat on other internal loop. Trim excess seam allowance from the edge by roughly 0.5 cm. Turn the loops through to the right side. It may help to use household objects such as the non-nib end of a pen or a chopstick to push the fabric through. Once through, gently fold one loop and position within the notches located above and below the lining seam. Sew internal loops 0.5 centimeters from the edge, reversing at beginning and end. This is to hold the loop in place when we sew the seam later. Repeat on opposite side. Now place this front piece on top of the back piece, right sides together, aligning notches and seams. Use fabric clips to hold in place if required. Sew the side seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. Between notches 2 and 4, increase your stitch length slightly, as this section will be opened later to create the drawstring channel. Then return to your normal stitch length and continue sewing the seam. Press the seam open. Moving on to the drawstring facing. To help keep the opening neat and symmetrical, I like to draw the rectangle before stitching. Using tailor's chalk, first draw a line connecting the 2 notches, then connect the drill holes with straight lines to form a rectangle. Ensure the rectangle measures 6 cm long by 2 cm wide. Repeat for both drawstring facings. Take one facing to the sewing machine and lay it face down on top of the side seam. Position the notches in line with the seam and align the drill holes on top of one another as best you can. Follow the guidelines to stitch a neat rectangle. Carefully cut along the centre line, stopping around 1 cm before each end. Clip diagonally towards each corner without cutting into the stitching. Repeat at the opposite end until you have something that looks like this. You can then see the seam underneath. Carefully cut along the stitching of the seam, stopping 1 cm before the end as before, and pivot to cut towards each stitched corner. I place my fingers behind the seam to ensure I'm not catching any other fabric. Push the facing through to the wrong side. If any corners are pulling, carefully trim a little closer to the stitching for a flatter finish. To help flatten the corners, I carefully iron the area. Ideally, you want to roll and iron the seam under towards the wrong side. This prevents it from being as well seen on the outside of the bag. If you're following along, you'll find the pattern linked below. It includes an additional 2 bag sizes which you can make by following this tutorial. After ironing, carefully edge stitch around the rectangle with the outside of the bag facing up. Unfortunately, my choice of camera angle here didn't work out, so I have limited clips of this process. You should then have something that looks like this. Next, fold right sides together and sew a 1 cm seam allowance down the opposite side seam, remembering to stop and increase stitch length between notches 2 and 4. Iron the seam open as best you can. It may help if you have a sleeve board or a tailor's ham which you can place under the seam. Once ironed, turn the bag through to the right side. Position the drawstring facing as before aligning drill holes as best possible and the central notches with the seam line. Position under the presser foot to hold in place. Turn the bag back through to the wrong side. Holding all the excess fabric away from the needle and presser foot and ensuring the central notches remain in line with the seam, follow and stitch the rectangle guidelines. Turn the bag through to the right side again. Cut the drawstring facing as before. Push the drawstring facing through the hole to the wrong side. Iron and edge stitch as before. Moving on to the base of the bag, stitch a 1 cm seam allowance along the bottom edge of the bag. Fold the side seams in towards the centre by 2 cm and stitch in place. At the opposite end, for the lining, straight stitch for 6 cm with a 1 cm seam allowance. Reverse stitch at beginning and end. Repeat for both right and left sides of the lining. Fold side seams in towards the centre of the bag by 2 cm as before and stitch into place. Turn the bag through the hole left in the lining. Iron the hole flat with a 1 cm seam allowance on the inside. Carefully edge stitch the lining hole closed. You should have something that looks like this. Push the lining into itself and into the base of the bag like so. Align the bottom edges of the drawstring rectangles so that they sit on top of one another. Stitch all the way through both layers, directly on top of this bottom stitch. Repeat on the opposite side. keep this project as resourceful as possible, you can repurpose an existing belt, cord or drawstring from your garment. Otherwise, cut bias strips from your chosen fabric and sew them into cords. I'll quickly show you the process here. I made the strips 2 cm wide as I wanted a finished cord width of 0.5 cm. Make 2 drawstring cords, each 75 cm long, and 1 shoulder strap, 120 cm long. I'm quite short, so this length suits me well, but you may want to adjust for your height or preferences. Thread the 2 shorter cords through the drawstring channel. Tie loose ends together in a knot at each side of the bag. For the removable shoulder strap, thread each end through the internal loops and secure with a knot. And that's the finished bag complete. If you've made one of your own, I'd love to hear what garment you repurposed. Don't forget to check the description for the pattern link, and I'll see you in the next project.